Hello, everyone. This is Alex, and I'm back again to share another presentation with you all for our Mather community quilts. So now I'm going to share my screen to show you all a presentation about weavings. So today I wanted to share with you all some weavings and textile artists for inspiration for your quilt squares. Weaving is how all of the fabrics we are using are held together. And some artists have been using the medium to create their own textiles and various designs. Pictured in the background here is actually a sneak peek of some of my own tapestry weavings. I made these this year using frame and cardboard looms, which are great when first getting started in weaving. I wanted to take a little time to remind you all of our community quilt project. We are accepting quilt squares from either a 6-inch by 6-inch size or 12-inch by 12-inch size. So with this, you can have about 1/2 inch to an inch of seam allowance around your square to allow for room for all of our squares to connect to each other. You may use any textile you have, or the art therapy team should be able to provide you with some materials if you are interested. For this quilt, we invite you all to reflect on the year of 2020 and represent that onto your square. This could vary from embroidering people with face masks on, using fabric paint to write a poem you wrote this year, or even using a different color to represent each month. There's even the possibility of sewing a weaving you've created onto fabric to add to your quilt square. There are so many possibilities, and I'm excited to see what you all have been working on. First, we have a very iconic artist, Sheila Hicks. Her experimentation with fiber art materials has been so innovative in the field. Beginning with her miniatures from her weavings, we can see her various color explorations and fringe like the strings in the middle weaving. The one on the left is almost two different pieces, and it's held together by that small line that travels from the left shape to the right. These explorations in design and texture could also be translated into various embroidery stitches or even using fabric to recreate these shapes, such as on the left. Some more of her weaving explorations. This is where she liked to use all kind of materials in her weavings, and she would weave them into the textile, such as the objects that we can see here on the left and even like a shell on the right. The middle one kind of looks like a paper that she has woven in, and then she stitched back over that. And so this kind of leaves an almost unfinished look for the work, which can be an artistic decision to make sometimes when working. This even opens the door into exploring what materials may make their way into your textile art and design, or the different ways you can include dimension into your art. Sheila has most recently been working in large sizes in her art practice, such as this large weaving, which is actually made of smaller weavings together. So each of these strips are long, small, thin weavings that she then measured and wove all together. This technique also reminds me of paper weaving and the possibilities of using other strips of materials to make your own textile. To recreate this idea, you can cut long strips of fabric and weave them together, either using contrasting colors, which is kind of what like Sheila did here, or even the same colors together. This can also be done with paper, and it could be a nice exercise for playing with color and layering. If you'd like to use paper, I think I'd recommend that it's a little thicker than magazine paper, so then it doesn't rip as easily when you're weaving them together. But it is still doable with magazine paper. You might just want to cut thicker strips of it or just be extra cautious when you're weaving them together. I think construction paper works really nicely with it though. So here is one of my favorites from her new work, where she filled a room from the floor to the ceiling with these large fiber balls of color. As we can see, Sheila is sitting on some of them in the right picture, which helps to see the size of these sculptural forms. If you like the idea of these fluffs of color, you could experiment with pom-poms on your fabric or finding ways to stuff certain areas of your square to create dimension. If you prefer a more 2D way of working, you could also experiment with making dots of various colors with fabric paint or markers and seeing where that takes you. So next I wanted to show you all a video of Sheila Hicks talking about her work to get an idea of how she creates.
Do you know the color you saw first this morning? Or maybe every morning? Do you sleep in a dark room, or do you wait for the light to rise? For the sun to come through the window, the light. When you go to sleep at night, do you leave the lights on? Do you turn them off? Do you sleep in a dark room and then begin to see colors before you fall asleep? I'm always thinking, looking, watching, observing, and am conscious of colors and color environments wherever I go. And I migrate toward the ones that have a power, a seduction, kind of special aura, and I avoid colors and combinations of colors that I find repellent. In graphic design today, we're bombarded by colors, in books, posters. We're living in a terrible time where the environment, the natural environment, is being damaged by the insensitive use of color. Here in the Arsenal, with the brick walls and the columns, the architecture is what caused me to think of texture. It's the impression and the music that color emotionally gives you. So this is about massive amount of color and how it affects its neighbors. It becomes an environment, a sculpture, but a sculptural environment, like a bas-relief in very deep relief, that you think you can walk into and get lost. I was with Joseph Albers at Yale in the late 50s. From morning to night, we did studies of learning about the physical fact and the psychic effect of spatial perception, color perception, and from there jump to human perception. How we each view, understand, and perceive things differently. Last year, when I came to see this space, I didn't think about the most important part of the whole room. And the most important part of the whole room are these cracks in the wall, where the bricks from age have begun to separate. I'm sure people are going to see many, many things here, but I hope they discover something as subtle and quiet as this, where art meets architecture.
And so next we have the tapestry artist Betty Vera, where in this series called Thread Lines, Betty Vera weaves with a jacquard loom to create these textiles of images with string. This is very similar to what the floor might end up looking like when weaving. And it is another example of finding the beauty even in the messes that may surround our art making. So she basically based these pieces on these random threads that would find their way on different surfaces. And I'm pretty sure with the jacquard, you have to use photographic images. So she must have taken pictures of these and somehow altered them, get them into the colors that she likes, and then she wove these images to show these little threads and the lines that they're making on these beautiful, vibrant colors. So these could even be moments of hair that have fallen from your pets or even your own. It could be that sock that never makes it into the laundry basket, or even those spills in the carpet that just don't want to come out. By making art about the topic, it can bring a newfound beauty to these various moments that we usually feel so inclined to fix or clean up. What little things do you notice around your house? Something interesting to explore for this year. So here's another series of Betty Vera's, and this one is called Underfoot. So Vera also used the jacquard loom for this series, which is how she gets these photographs onto the textiles. So she created weavings of what we may often not notice when walking around in our daily lives. Here she found beauty in the colors of oil that spilled on concrete, or even the rust that has formed over time on the right. Her work really shows how so many artists make art on what they notice as beautiful or meaningful. And then she's able to share its beauty with the wider audience through her art making. Or else these moments could also just go unnoticed. It almost makes me want to pay more attention to what's under my feet when I'm walking to the grocery store or even on a stroll by Lake Michigan. Samantha Bittman is a textile artist who uses repetition, pattern, and color to often play with optical illusions in her work. I personally enjoy her use of pattern and how she strategically breaks the patterns up with the additional shapes or colors. And some of her work, such as the textiles with triangles on it, is where Bittman hand wove the weaving and then she went back over the surface in some areas with acrylic paint, such as seen in the red and pink triangles on the left. So she's making a surface and then going back over it. So this could also be recreated if you go back over, you have a textile with a print on it, you can break up that textile with some paint or dye techniques to create your own pattern with it. Annie Albers was a student of the Bauhaus in Germany in the 1920s. She is known for her textile work done there and the various ways she uses line and colors in her design. She relates a lot of the weaving process to architecture and usually draws her designs on paper first to plan. This could be a good way of working when you're planning what you would like to add to your quilt square. Her number one rule for being an artist was to embrace the accidents, and she saw accidents as a part of her process and how it can lead to an unexpected but beautiful path for each artwork. She also embraced play into her process of weaving, which is something I think can be important as well. Here we have some more of her weavings, where you can begin to see the playfulness in her lines or pops of color. The waviness of the lines created with the string on the left reminds me of rippling water, or even those roads that cross back and forth to travel up a mountain. These two weavings also show experimenting with contrasting and complementary colors. such as the dark blue and orange, which complement each other into appearing more vibrant than if it were done with a lighter color, such as yellow and orange. Gunta Stolz is another artist who was a part of the Bauhaus movement in textiles. Her work was inspired by painters such as Paul Klee and his visual thinking, as well as Kandinsky's abstract art. In the middle, we have an example of the painting she would do also to plan her textile designs. As we can see, she created various patterns and colors all onto one textile. In a way, they can sometimes resemble optical illusions, creating movement in the shapes of the patterns, as well as how she was arranging them into this composition. If you're thinking of what to design on your quilt square, a great idea from Stoles would be to paint what you are imagining. This way, you are able to experiment with different ideas, colors, shapes, and patterns to decide which best fits your style and what you would like to put on your square. Claire Zeisler is another Bauhaus artist. As we can see, she is very experimentative in her art and materials. To the left, we can see how she included various materials into her weavings, such as metal and netting, giving it an interesting new composition that we might not usually picture textile wall hangings to look like. To the far right is one of her weavings with vibrant colors, and in the middle is a piece in the style she is probably most known for. The way she works really highlights the material that is used when making a textile, such as yarn or thread. Often, we are not always trying to showcase the yarn and thread in this way, and especially in weaving and sewing, we often might try to cover them up. In the middle, she has made the entire piece about the material and exploring one color while doing so. It makes you think of what kind of objects and materials would you like to explore in your own work. Lenore Tawney is another inventive artist who experimented with empty space in her work. As we can see in the middle, she has left some gaps at the top and also in the middle of her weaving where there's the dark color. On the left, she added feathers and used blues in the center of an all-white surface, which draws the attention into the middle. In the middle weaving, you can see her experimentations with the empty space and how she made the warp visible to the viewers. This, along with the vibrant colors, is nice in a way. It gives us some space for a breath in that darkness and in between the layers of colors. To the right is a portrait piece she wove together. This process can be extremely difficult without the use of a tapestry loom. I think usually weaving in this way, some people like to have a piece of paper behind their weaving so they can see what shapes they're following and what lines to go with. And the way she used color in this weaving also kind of resembles a watercolor or kind of painterly. Here are some more Lenore Tawney experimentations. My favorite is in the middle, where she unraveled some of the string in the textile, or she might have left the warp intentionally without a weft. This act of removing thread still draws the eye to the shape she created and these differences in the texture. To the right, we can see another weaving where she experimented in a similar way, picking only a few select spots to include a weft. And this technique leaves the textile with a waviness, almost reminding me of the water when a sun sets. On the far left, we can see her addition of beads and texture on her tapestry. Although it's mostly monochromatic, the textures and beads gives it a more playful quality and is an example of the various textures one might want to do when creating. Victoria Manganiello is an artist who considers her weavings as paintings, and she dyes the yarn herself before, during, and after the weaving process, such as pictured on the right, where she has her paintbrush lying next to her weaving. This could be done by using fabric paint or dye techniques on various fabrics and cutting them into different strips of fabric, then either piecing or appliquing them together or onto a composition. Also, the idea of painting your material before, during, and after is another interesting idea. Although painting after might be a little trickier to fix once you've finished. If you like this idea, you can keep some fabric paint or fabric markers nearby to make marks or splashes of paints in areas while you work. In these pieces, it looks like as if there were dyeing techniques done on the left pieces, which were then cut and rearranged to make these compositions. She was strategic in how she organized her colors, such as the moments of white next to the green and orange paint, or even those moments of bleach dye on the textile to the right to make a rusty color against a dark background. These moments of bleach makes me think again of those spills or mistakes that may make their way into your artwork and the different ways we can use them to explore their shape and color on textiles. These also have a collage-like way of being sewn together, which could be an inspiring way to work with a few fabrics you may be thinking of altering. You can always cut them into different pieces and lie them out next to each other to almost piece them together like a puzzle to make a composition. Joseph Grau Garcia was another tapestry artist who was very experimentative in his work through his use of various textures and material, with also these color choices. In these works, there is a lot of use of natural tans and browns. With his addition of greens and blues, it transforms the surfaces into looking like landscapes of some sort. His use of fringe is interesting to think about, how the texture of the fringe adds to the surface of the textile and gives it more dimension. This could also be created with embroidery, such as using the turkey work stitch or also with the fringe beading techniques. Here are some more of his explorations with the color red and even more layers and textures with yarn. The left almost resembles natural material and reminds me of hay found on farms or even dry grass. On the right, we can see how he layered some of his weaving in certain areas, adding to the dimensions. These ideas could be inspiration or for adding texture or even experimenting with one color in various ways to tell a story or create a space that you are imagining. These also kind of in the middle remind me of little close-ups of different textures and stuff that you might be able to find around your house. Terry Friedman is another artist using vibrant colors in her work and exploring with different textures, yarn, color, and shapes in her art. When looking at these for longer amounts of time, they start to form either landscapes or even sometimes portraits to me. Even though they are abstract, it leaves me thinking about the different ways we can explore abstraction in creating textile art. and how sometimes line can even imply a place or person without it having to be representational. Her works are very large scale, and here we can see her exploring vibrant colors alongside neutral colors and empty space in between different sections of the textile. This could be done through cutting or even reverse applique in your quilt square. Aiko Tezuka is an artist who uses unraveling in her art. Usually, it looks like with upholstery fabric. On the left, we can see where the artist is exploring with layering text over a pattern and also leaving hanging threads from the textile. On the right, they have been stretched like a painting canvas, except for the center blue threads. Those are gathered together. Here we have more unraveled works of Tezuka's. It is interesting to think about the various colors of thread that come together to make the surface, and the designs that are left on the warp of the woven textiles. So these moments where we can't see the image and it's more pixelated, those are the moments of the warp of the weaving. And the string that goes left to right is the weft. And so by taking these out or unraveling them, sometimes they leave these colors or patterns almost in like a washed out look. Here are some more weavings where she unraveled certain parts of the weft to expose the warp of the textile. Doing so, there are less colors in the unraveled parts, which gives a different perspective on the image and content. On the left, we can see how carefully the threads were removed to create a circle shape in the middle. It's almost resembling like a frame. This could be an idea to explore with the textiles you have and altering them in different ways. So unraveling textiles usually works best with a lower thread count fabric. It might be tiring for the eyes if you have a high thread count fabric. But if you have a weaving you've created or creating, you can experiment with what it looks like when you leave an area empty to create this look intentionally. Julia Bland is an artist using weaving and tapestry techniques to experiment with patterns and space. Her use of weaving at times makes its own pattern, such as what we see on the left and in the middle. With her choice of shape and composition, her work almost creates a space, such as when I look at the middle artwork, I almost feel like I'm looking into a little room. These are also great examples of empty space surrounding the art to create the composition. Marcel Moroy wove these different designs into an abstract painterly look, done in many layers. So these could be an inspiration for exploring with fabric paints or markers and layering colors over the design you've created. You can always do a trial of this on a piece of paper to make sure you like what the colors look like on top of your design before committing to the technique. So these could also be done on small pieces of paper, just little explorations that you could make bigger later on, or could recreate bigger into your quilt square size. You could also piece together a bunch of little versions of these, and it could create something really interesting. Sue Spooner is an artist who naturally dyed all of her yarn that she used to weave. She also would sometimes weave specific places, such as on the far left, is based on Alcatraz. These are great ways to use color and shape when wanting to represent a specific place that you have in mind and that you'd like to add to your quilt square. She at times uses a grid-like method, where it's like our perspective is looking down on the place from an airplane window. Yet the piece on the far right shows us what a place might look like when we're looking straight ahead, such as how she placed the stairs into her composition. There also seems to be more use of shadow in the piece on the right due to this perspective. Polly Barton is a textile artist who weaves designs such as these using shape and color to create, as well as the way she experiments with almost making a natural frame around the center imagery in her textiles. Here, the textile is more broken up by texture and colors. The way the warp and weft are surrounding the central parts of the tapestry reminds me of lines. So if you enjoy how this looks, you could create lines with either a fabric pen or fabric paint, or you could even sew multiple lines to create this natural frame look around a central image or pattern. When first looking at these, they could almost be mistaken for pencil drawings or even watercolors. Although these are woven textiles, there could be a way to recreate this experimentation with colors on a white piece of fabric using either fabric paint or even fabric markers or pens. Something to point out also is the way she has chosen to break up the colors to almost make a frame around the colors in the center again. The one on the left even resembles a quilt square to me, kind of like the log cabin. If you wanted to attempt to break up the colors in this way, I would use either a lighter or darker color next to the one you want to stand out. Such as on the left, we can see this light gray or blue color standing out against the kind of darker blue color in the background. Tommy McClure Scanlon has a series of weavings where she made a daily diary using weavings to show her year. Here are only a few from her series, and some of the blank squares, such as the ones on the very far right, is her showing where she's gone on holiday trips. So each other square represents a day where she created a color or multiple colors, a pattern for that day. So I think this is an interesting approach to representing an amount of time or even just the entire year. And although we are nearing the end of our year 2020, this could be an interesting idea to explore for the upcoming year, or also for when we're reflecting back on 2020 for this quilt square. So this could be done with a color to represent each month, or even a painted line representing each month, week, or day. Jason Musson is an artist who began experimenting with the well-known sweaters into a painting series where he cut up various sweaters with these layers of color and cut them up to stitch them back together and create a new picture, which he calls paintings, even though they're made out of woven and sweater material. His reconstruction of these sweaters also addresses the status symbol these sweaters represented when they are popularly worn by rap star Notorious Big and other well-known African American music artists in early 90s hip hop. The way he stitched these textiles back together in various ways adds to the painterly look one gets when looking at them. This idea could be done with old clothes or textiles or even used clothing at a thrift store or even socks. So these could be cut up and then sewn back together. If you use a pattern and you think you want some moments of solid color, a great example is how he used solid color on the left, where he used a strip and then that almost creates it into a landscape type painting. And these are all woven sweaters, even though they look so painterly. So Victor and Rolf used recycled materials into their weavings to create a fashion line. So these combinations of colors and materials were brought together to create beautiful textures to make the models look like walking art. Instead of weaving with yarn, these artists took the approach of using various fabrics and recycled materials to weave their own textiles. This could also be done using your own various fabric strips and experimenting on what ways they fit best together. Or for me, when I weave, I usually improvise and let the materials make the decisions for themselves, which might be how they planned this, I'm not sure. Here are a few final pieces of this collection, making these weaving designs into almost couture wear. These are also inspiring when deciding what textures might look nice next to each other, such as an upholstery, like the woven fabric, against a tulle, like these tutus, or chiffon. Or even thinking of maybe that cotton material next to the woven fabrics on the left. So lastly, I wanted to finish our presentation by showing you all a video of weaving techniques done all over the world to make fabrics, rugs, and designs with various looms.
Kalau misalnya sekali kita puru botai.
Disons, c'est une bonne barre. Comme ça, elle est géniale. Ok. Comme ça, elle est géniale.
They used to be $45 a box when I was here. I can only imagine what it costs now.
And so now we will end by going over a few more things for the community quilt, just as a reminder. Um, so again, our community quilt project, we invite you all to reflect on this year of 2020 and express that experience or a story you have onto your very own quilt square. So this is open to any fabrics that you have, and they need to either be in the size of 12 inches by 12 inches or a 6 by 6 square. And this will need at least half an inch of seam allowance up to an inch of seam allowance. And I'm very excited to see what you all have been up to with your various textile materials. And I will see you again next week with some more inspirations. So thank you all for joining. I'll see you again next week.